Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, the podcast where I read up on cybersecurity news and tell you the details of a story I deemed interesting or important in small episodes. This week we have a story that broke out on Tuesday of last week, and it will remain important for you when you check your emails. This is EvilProxy, a phishing-as-a-service toolkit that can bypass two-factor authentication. You're probably familiar with phishing. Emails sent to you asking for personal information or account credentials so that your account can be accessed, usually in the form of a link that leads you to a fake site asking you to sign in. As a rule of thumb, whenever you get an email with a link on it, don't click the link. Open a new tab in your web browser and go to what you know for sure is the official website. Sign in and check for any notifications there. Two-factor authentication is something I talk about very positively here. It's simply using two factors to authenticate or prove your identity. A password is one factor, and a one-time password or SMS code is a second factor. These are something you know and something you have, respectively. Another common second factor is a fingerprint, which is something you are. Important note, the authentication factors themselves have to be different to count as two-factor authentication. If you're asked a password and for a security question answer, those are both something you know, and therefore, even though it's two things, it's still one-factor authentication. And just a bit of advice, as opposed to being texted a code for two-factor authentication, I would highly recommend using an authenticator app instead. The codes there are time-based and are much more difficult to intercept. Unfortunately, text messages are not as hard for hackers to intercept as you'd probably like to think. Now that we've got all of the education out of the way, what is EvilProxy, the phishing service? What even is a phishing service? How can phishing be a service? A write-up on ReSecurity described the service as using a reverse proxy, which is a server that sits between you and the website and intercepts your requests. Now, a reverse proxy is not always a bad thing. If you have multiple servers up, a reverse proxy can be used to route your traffic to the appropriate server. In this case, it links you to a fake website, but it fetches content from the real site in order to look legitimate. It also sniffs your network traffic for credentials like your username and password, and importantly, any two-factor authentication codes you enter, and uses a method called cookie injection to take these valid credentials and forward them to the actual website you're trying to log into. So, in a very roundabout way, you actually are logging into the real website. Just not in the way you think you are. Apps or websites it has been demonstrated to work on include giants like Google, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, and Twitter. If you receive any suspicious emails from any of these companies, or really from anyone or any website at all, I cannot emphasize this enough. Do not click on it. But social media isn't the only thing that can be phished. Websites like GitHub and Python Package Index are used by developers and have also been targeted. This means some projects can be poisoned if the developers are phished and malicious code added. At least 2 legitimate Python packages are known to have been poisoned in this method. By hacking developers and injecting malicious code into legitimate software, there is a potential for users of the software to also be affected, especially if you think it comes from a trusted source. Developers, I encourage you to be extra careful opening emails, and users of software, unfortunately there is not a whole lot you can do, besides holding off on immediately updating any software. EvilProxy has been linked to a recent data breach from Twilio last month in August, which I actually almost covered but didn't, so hey, I guess I can do that now. Consider this a double feature. On August 4th, 2022, Twilio noticed unauthorized access being made to customer account data. This occurred after a phishing attack, which we now know is linked to EvilProxy, against employees at Twilio pretending to be their own IT department. The phishing messages sent said that the user's passwords needed to be changed, and it linked to a phishing website, of course. 163 Twilio customers, which are not individuals but corporations, had their data accessed and were all notified by Twilio of the incident. 93 individual users of Authy, a two-factor authentication app, also had data accessed and were again notified by Twilio. So we know all about EvilProxy, we know what it does, we know that it's being used in the wild. What about the service part, though? Well, what's scary about EvilProxy is that it's cheap and it's easy to use. It is a phishing-as-a-service service. When you pay for the service, which is $400 a month or $600 a month if you're after Google accounts, over Telegram, a messaging app used for plenty of legitimate purposes, but also far-right groups and hackers, you will be given access to a portal and a nice friendly graphical interface to customize phishing emails how you want. There's even video tutorials on setting up your own phishing campaign. It doesn't take a hacker with a lot of skill or time to use this service. Just a bit of cash. $400 a month may seem pricey, but phishing campaigns can make a lot of money. Most modern data breaches involve phishing, and a data breach is an extremely expensive incident. Aside from data being copied and sold, bank accounts, of course, can also be breached via phishing. Even then, you can pay smaller amounts for shorter campaigns, but $400 a month is actually the best deal. Another hidden cost to consider for any hackers is that you won't make 100% of the money you phish out of people. Of course, the creators of this service will take some as commission as well. EvilProxy is a sophisticated phishing service that bypasses multi-factor authentication and relies on the trust of users. Even at large companies like Twilio, the people who have access to your account information are ultimately people, and therefore can be tricked. Be careful when clicking on links in emails and text messages. If there's an issue with the site that you're being notified of, open a new tab and go to the site you know is legitimate, or send a separate email to the support team with the official support email address listed on the website. Don't reply to shady emails either. Thank you to Hacker News, Bleeping Computer, Dark Raider, Info Security Magazine, and most importantly, ReSecurity for information on EvilProxy. And thanks to Okta and Twilio for being open about the data breach linked to this phishing service. And a final thanks to you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime. By the way, if you want a sticker to remind you not to click on links, go to cybersecchloe.redbubble.com for just that and other bite-sized cybercrime merch. From now on, along with the usual source list in my paste bin, I'm also going to be including links to places like my Twitter, anywhere you can listen to the podcast, my Redbubble, and other things you may be interested in. I can promise you, these are not phishing links. Until next time, don't click on shady links in emails and stay secure.